Hi everybody and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be filming my very first Designs by Juju project. We're going to work on the Halloween mini quilt. This comes in several sizes. I'm going to be working on the 8x12 hoop size today. It's available as 5x7, 6x10, 7x12, 8x12, and 9.5x14. I did purchase this on my own during a sale and I'm adding Designs by Juju to the channel by request. Thanks to everybody who asked. Let's get started going over our materials. On page 2 of the printout, there's a supply list and a fabric cutting chart. There's a block A, B, C, and then your backing. What I like to do is use sticky notes and cover up the parts that I'm not going to use so I don't accidentally cut the wrong size. You can see across the top there's 5x7, 6x10, 7x12, 8x12, which is what I'm doing. So that's uncovered, and 9.5x14. I've already cut and prepped all my fabrics. Let's go through my fabric and my thread selection. On the bottom of the instructions, it talks about adding SF 101 to the background fabrics and some instructions about different size and hoopings. Go ahead and make sure you read that. In addition to all these instructions, there's also separate PDF files having to do with thread and layouts and how that all looks. I didn't print those out, but I did look at them. Block A is the center block, the pumpkin block. This is the fabric I picked for my background. This is the purple fabric. My pumpkin fabric is a Spotted by Zen Chic. I got that fabric from a fat quarter bundle I have in my stash. We need a fabric for our stem and a fabric for our leaf. I've pulled all my solids for this project from the solid fat quarter bundles. I did the bundle a month for 1 year and I made the quilt, this quilt right here. This was Fat Quarter Shop a few years ago. The solid fabrics are art gallery fabrics and I've already made a quilt with them. They're very heavily starched, so they're very tight. They almost feel like paper. I went ahead and put SF 101 on the back of them. I went through the project and I pulled some thread colors. I've got black, and these are all Sim Thread brand. I've got a bunch of these. I bought them when I first started doing embroidery. This is kind of a golden brown, a nice green. You can see that's not even open yet. And I'm very excited to use this one. This is a glow-in-the-dark thread. I looked up when I bought these. I bought a set of glow-in-the-dark thread in 2021. It's about time I use it. I'll also be using this orange for the satin stitching on the pumpkin. That's everything for block A. I'm going to show you the rest of my blocks and then we'll get started. Block B are the flying geese triangle blocks. They're located here, 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 and here on the quilt. I used the same background fabric. I didn't put any SF 101 on the back of this one. There's no quilting that's happening on this part of the block. The quilting is only on this part of the block, so I didn't feel like I needed to put the SF 101 on the purple. Got this bright orange. Again, this is an art gallery fabric, heavily starched. I did put the SF 101 on the back of that. That's going to be the part that's going to have the cobweb stitching, and then the purple is going to be my side triangle fabric, and I have all my batting prep for each block. This is scrap batting. I do long arm quilting. It's Hobbs 80/20. Block C are the corner fabrics. I picked another orange. This is a darker orange. I do have the SF 101 on the back, and I have my batting prep. And for this project, your backing is also your binding. I've never done this before. If you have the instructions, it's on page 13 where it starts. You can see how it's centered here along the backing, and then we're going to bring it around to the front and make binding out of our backing. Stabilizer for this project, I'm going to use my light mesh cutaway by Kimberbell. Designs by Juju just came out with their own line of stabilizers. I don't have any of that. Load your stabilizer, hand tighten, screwdriver tighten. Let's head over to the machine. I'm on a Baby Lock Meridian. I've got my instructions. My files are on USB. Let's go ahead and bring up this project. You'll see more than this on the USB. In fact, I bought a whole bunch of their projects. They had a big giant summer sale and they're still having a sale going on at Designs by Juju. I'll make sure to link them below. If there's something in particular by Designs by Juju you'd like to see, please let me know. Leave it in the comments below. Let's pull the file for the Halloween mini quilt. And I'm doing the 8x12 and we're on block A. Right down here in the corner, 8x12 block A. It's our pumpkin block. You can see it's giving me a warning about thread colors. I'm not worried about the thread colors. I don't feel the need to go in and program my thread colors. I'm fine with that. I'm going to go ahead and set it. It's just one file. The file's loaded. I'm ready to go. I'm going to hit embroidery. The first thing we're going to stitch is a batting placement line. I went ahead and loaded a neutral thread color on my machine. Let's go ahead and stitch that out. Grab your batting, measure to the measurements in the instructions, That makes sense, doesn't it? Go ahead and cover your placement line and then stitch your tack down line. You want to go ahead and trim all the extra that's outside of that tack down line. Once you have your batting trimmed, there is no fabric placement line. You just use that line that's stitched on the batting and make sure to cover that with your fabric. And I cut my fabric according to the directions. There's plenty of fabric. You're not going to make a mistake with that. Go ahead, lay that down. If you're using a light colored fabric, check underneath for things like stray threads, dog hair, cat hair to make sure it doesn't show through. But my fabric's dark. Place your fabric and then you're going to stitch the tack down line. I'm going to leave this neutral off-white thread on my machine for the tack down line. It'll help me later when we go to trim the block. I'll be able to see it easier than if I used a purple that blended in. The next step, step 7, it says use the applique method to complete the block. For additional assistance, refer to the tutorial included with the download. I'm just going to follow my machine and step through everything. I can see the next step is going to be a placement line for the stem. I'm going to go ahead again and leave that neutral thread on. We want to cover that up with our fabric and we're going to stitch a tack down line. This is probably personal preference. I'm going to go ahead and switch to the color that I'm going to use for the satin stitching with this rather than use the white thread as my tack down line. Just in case some of this pokes through, I want to make sure it'll match the satin stitching. Once you have your fabric tacked down, go ahead and trim everything that's outside that tack down line. The next step is to stitch out the placement line for our pumpkin, so I went ahead and switched to my orange thread. Go ahead and grab your pumpkin fabric, cover that placement line. I am going to put a small piece of tape on that to hold it in place. It's just some paper tape. Make sure that stays, and then we're going to stitch the tack down line. Go ahead and trim the excess orange fabric from outside of that tack down line. I apologize for background noise. It's laundry day again. Our next step is to stitch the leaf placement line. I switched to my green thread. Take your leaf fabric, cover that placement line, stitch the tack down, and then trim. I've got everything trimmed. We're stitching our ghost next. I'm using that glow-in-the-dark thread. My ghost is stitched out. It's interesting because the thread looks like it's white, but when it's stitched out on the fabric, it looks a little bit more gray, which is fine. Switch to your brown thread. We're going to stitch the satin outline of the pumpkin stem. Switch to your orange thread or whatever you're using for your pumpkin satin stitch. I also changed bobbins and put in a nice full bobbin. Once your pumpkin is done, switch to green. Now for my detail around my leaf and the leaves and the vines, I'm using the same color green. When I look at the picture, it looks like they've got kind of a darker muted green for this step with the little twirly leaves and vines, and then they have a brighter green on the leaf. When you purchase this, there are separate files that show the detail for the thread coloring. I'm going to go with one green. My leaves and vines are stitched. I'm using the same green for the satin detail and the little veins on this leaf. If you're using two different greens, make sure to switch your thread. My green's all stitched. I've put my black thread on my machine, and I forgot to show this at the beginning as well. These are the types of needles I'm currently using. They're a non-stick needle, size 80-12. These were suggested to me by somebody who watches the channel. Thank you so much. Normally I use a regular embroidery needle, 75-11, but I've had these on. They're working really well, especially with applique and heavy satin stitching. Let's go ahead and stitch out. It's going to be the jack-o'-lantern face, and then it looks like the eyes for the ghost, and then after that the little ghost smile. I ran out of bobbin thread. I put a new bobbin in. Here's what I do when I run out of bobbin thread. I back up my machine. 5 stitches is fine. Especially since it's doing a detail stitch, I want to make sure it has the first couple stitches to tack down and then it can keep going without having a gap. I'm ready to go. I'm going to finish my stitch out. Here's a close-up of block A. Came out beautifully. Love it. Really anxious to try the glow-in-the-dark thread and see how that turns out. I'm getting ready to stitch block B, and when I load it on my machine, even though I selected the 8x12, and even though that embroidery field is less than 8x12, my machine is asking for the big hoop. So I'm doing block B in the 9.5 by 14 hoop. When I use the bigger hoop, I have to use the bigger size stabilizer, and it only fits one way in my hoop. It has to go this way. If I try to do it this way, there's not enough at the top and the bottom to secure it. So I have to put it in long ways. One of the things that I've learned when I do that is if I put just a little bit on one side and more on the other side, when I take my project out of my hoop, I can cut and then save this bit of stabilizer, and usually I can use this in a 5x7 hoop. Let's go ahead and load block B and I'll show you what I was talking about. Now I'm doing the 8x12 size, and you can see here's block B. 5x7 it does one block, and the other sizes it does two at a time. Here's my 8x12, and I get this little message that tells me the pattern extends outside of the frame. If you plan to add more patterns, rotate the pattern combination. I have to rotate it or it won't let me set it at all. So you rotate it, and there it is. After I hit set, I go to the very top. See how all my little hoops are grayed out except the big one? That's the biggest hoop I have, the 9.5 by 14. So it won't let me use an 8x12 for this, even though it has the area at 11.55 inches by 7.83 inches. And I did try putting an 8x12 hoop on, it didn't work. Luckily I have a larger hoop, so that'll work for me. I did take a moment and I advanced through the design to see how this was going to stitch out. It's going to do the top block first, and then the bottom block. If you have extra stabilizer, make sure it's off to the side, it's not caught under your machine. I've got my neutral thread. We're going to start with our batting placement line. I've got my rectangle stitched out. I'm going to put down our batting just like before, and then we're going to stitch the batting tack down line. I'm going to trim this just like before, get that excess batting out of the way. Once your batting's trimmed, we're going to stitch the center line for the triangle fabric. We want to place our fabric to cover that triangle. This piece of fabric has a selvage and a corner missing. I figured it would probably work. Plenty big enough. Once you have that down, we're going to stitch the tack down line. I'm going to go ahead and switch to the orange for my tack down line. We're going to trim this, but you're going to trim it a little differently. It tells you to trim it as shown in this picture. So up, down, leave a little bit there, up, down, and leave all of this. I've got that trimmed. You have quite a bit of leftover fabric. You can save that for another project with applique. I've switched to my glow-in-the-dark thread. We're going to stitch the cobweb detail. The cobweb detail's all stitched out. I'm going to switch back to the orange. We're going to place our side triangles. I'm going to stitch a placement line. Grab your side triangle fabric. It says to line it up parallel with that line, but to extend it 1/8 to 1/4 inch over. I'm going to eyeball it. Make sure I've got that line completely covered, and then we're going to stitch a tack down line. That came out pretty good. I have a little bit of fabric extra on that side and a little bit extra on that side. I probably have more than 1/8 to 1/4. That's okay. You want to flip that so it's right side up. I have a little clover seam roller. I'm just going to roll it. You can even finger press it. Once you've pressed it, it says tape down to secure in place. I'm not sure where to tape it. I'll tape it here. And then make sure that's pulled nice and tight. And right over here. That's probably fine. Now it's going to stitch here and here. Just make sure it's nice and flat because there's not going to be any quilting on this piece of fabric. We're going to do the same thing on this side. Let's place our fabric same way we did before. Stitch the tack down. Flip that and press it on your ironing board if you like. Don't ever iron on the bed of your machine. You'll melt your machine. I'm going to grab my tape from this side and just use it again on the other side. And then go ahead and stitch that seam. This is all done, but we're going to stitch another one in the bottom of our hoop. And the instructions show flipping the fabric up and taping it up and out of the way so we can stitch the next block underneath. I'm going to do the exact same thing. I won't film it, we just did that. So you'll do your second block here, then you'll reload your stabilizer and do 2 more. You need a total of 4 of these blocks. My first 2 blocks are done. Again, you need to have 4, so I need to go through the whole process and do that again. I'm going to trim these all together at the end. So I'm going to take this off my machine, pull this out of the hoop, load stabilizer again, and do this process. I'll go and do that off camera, and we are going to start working on block C. We're on to block C. Let's go ahead and bring that up. This is another one where it's setting up 2 per hooping, and I have to use my big 9.5 by 14 hooping even though I'm doing the 8 by 12 blocks. It's right here at the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and hit set and embroidery. I've got a neutral thread on my machine. When it's time to do the quilting, I'm going to use my glow-in-the-dark thread. Let's stitch out our batting placement. Placement line is stitched. I'm going to put my batting down, and we'll do our batting tack down line. Once you've got your batting trimmed, that counts as your placement line. Make sure it's covered, plenty of fabric. Now we're going to stitch a tack down line for our fabric. I'm actually going to switch to orange thread for the tack down, and then I'm going to switch to the glow-in-the-dark thread for the quilting. The fabric is tacked down. Don't trim it at this point. Switch to whatever thread you're going to use for the quilting. First block is done. We're going to do another one in the hoop. Looking at this, I didn't even notice there's bats in each corner. Until it was stitching, I just saw this as a design. Isn't that funny? We're going to repeat the same steps. One thing it shows here in the instructions is taping your fabric out of the way. I don't think I have that much excess fabric. Let's do the next block and see if I have to tape anything out of the way. It's kind of hard to see, but my placement line is right here. So that means my tack down line is going to go right there. If I want, I can fold this up and tape this out of the way, but I don't feel like I need to because the other line is right here. Let's go ahead and stitch our tack down line. I can just slide that under like that. The batting is trimmed. Here's where it shows taping. Let's go ahead and place this like that in the picture, and where it shows adding the tape is up on top like that. Might prevent your fabric from sliding. This is really slick fabric. I'll go ahead and tape it per the instructions. I'm going to stitch the tack down in orange, and then I'll stitch the quilting. I've got my first 2 blocks done. I need to do 1 more hooping and make 2 more of these. I'll go ahead and do that off camera, and then we'll trim our blocks and assemble our mini quilts. It's time to trim our blocks. Looking at the instructions, it says to trim the edges of the block of each side a 1/2 inch from the outer stitching line. So that's a 1/2 inch away from that stitching line. Then when I go to look at the quilt assembly, it talks about sewing the blocks together, sewing just barely inside the outer stitch line of the block. Here's what I'm looking at and what I'm thinking. Here's the outer stitch line. When you turn this block to the back, this is the outer stitch line, and there's a small gap, and then there's a line where your batting is. So there's this little tiny channel where there's no batting. When I sew my blocks together, I use a 1/4 inch guide foot. So if I cut 1/2 inch outside of this outer line, I'm going to have quite a bit that doesn't match up between my blocks, and I'll be seeing this line here on the front. Here's what I'm going to do, and we'll see if it works, and then you can decide what you'd like to do on your own quilt. I'm going to flip my blocks to the back. I'm going to measure a 1/4 inch away from this line that's tacking down the batting. not the outer tack down line. The reason I want to try that is because when I'm joining my blocks together with my 1/4 inch guide foot, it's got a little guide so you bump your fabric against it. I want to sew on this line here, or as close to that line as possible. I don't want to sew on this line and have a gap. So when my blocks are together and I have them fold out, I don't want to have a weird gap between my blocks where there's no batting. So instead of measuring off this line here, I'm going to measure off of, it's the batting tack down line. I've got a ruler here that has a 1/4 inch mark, and I'm going to put it on that batting tack down line. What that's going to do is give me a 1/4 of an inch for my seam allowance. So all my blocks should match up real nice, and when I fold my blocks out, the batting will be like this. Let me grab that other block. And everything should bump up together without having like a gap in between. I don't want to have a gap in between, and I want to use my 1/4 inch guide foot. If you don't use a guide foot, you can certainly follow the instructions. Trim 1/2 inch away from the outside line, just like it says, and then when you go to sew it together, you can follow the instructions right here, and it says to sew the blocks together, sewing just barely inside the outer stitch line. I'm going to trim all of my blocks, and then we'll see how this turns out. And it looks like I may have cut a little bit crooked, but that's okay. I'm never worried about it. If things are a little bit crooked, when they're this cute and this pretty, when it's done and your whole project's put together, nobody knows. Nobody's going to see it. Let's go ahead and move on to our next block. We've got these to trim next. The first thing I want to do is move all this over. Remember how I talked about how I lined up the stabilizer in my hoop? And I want to cut and save this big piece. Look at this big piece of stabilizer on the side. I want to be able to reuse that. Just to show you, here's a 5x7 hoop. I can get one thing in there and another thing in there. So this is good for 2 hoopings in a 5x7 hoop. I want to save that. Then I'm going to go around and trim any extra stabilizer before I trim my block, just to kind of get it out of the way. I might even be able to use that. Not for that, but for a 4x4 hoop, you could definitely use it for that. So go ahead, trim away your extra stabilizer. One more tip. I'm being real frugal with this stabilizer because, you know, it's not cheap. So like this, you know, this won't fit in a 5x7 hoop. It can go in a 4x4 hoop. But when you have little pieces like this, I've actually done this before. I'll sew them on the sides. I have another one. And then I can put it in a 5x7 hoop. You can sew it on the sides and on the top and bottom, and then you're not wasting this nice piece or even these little scraps that normally you probably can't use for anything. I'm ready to trim this block. Again, if you're following the instructions, it tells you to trim the edges of the block, each side, a 1/2 inch from the outer stitching line. I'm going to go ahead and do mine a 1/4 inch away. I'm going to separate my blocks. I'm going to go ahead and trim these all the same way. I'm going to do that 1/4 inch, this way, and trim that 1/4 inch away. This block is trimmed. This one trimmed up really straight. These are going to go like this. So when I put this on my sewing machine to join my blocks, I have a 1/4 of an inch right here. So it's going to eliminate this strip that doesn't have any batting. I'm going to trim the rest of these the same way. Here's my 4 blocks. I'm saving all my little scraps. Maybe I can use these again in another project. Let's go on to the square corner blocks. I'm going to do the same thing with these blocks. I'm going to trim away my big giant piece of stabilizer so I can use that again, and then we'll trim our blocks. I've got the excess stabilizer trimmed away. I want to separate these blocks before I trim them. You've got that little bit of stabilizer right there in the middle you need to get rid of. So go ahead and separate your blocks. If you're following the instructions, you're going to trim 1/2 inch outside of that stitch line right there, I'm going to go ahead and flip to the back and do my 1/4 inch trim from this inside batting tack down line. Got my first block trimmed. My ruler slipped there, you might have seen that. I'll be careful when I'm stitching that. I'm going to put a little pin right there. Actually, I have a clip here. I'll just put a clip here. And then when I lay out my quilt to put it together, I'll just put this one at the top. That way I don't have to worry about joining it to anything. I'll just catch it in the binding. I'm going to trim my last 3 blocks and then we'll do layout. I thought I'd show you. I just grabbed a Ziploc bag and I've got all the extra stabilizer in here, and then I have an extra plastic bag for my scraps. That way these things are organized and out of the way. I've got all 4 of these trimmed, and I have another clip. Had another slip with the ruler. That'll be just fine. Let's lay out our quilt for assembly. There's a great picture right here, page 11 of your instructions. You want to lay out all your blocks like that. I've got mine laid out. Make sure all your triangles are pointing in toward your pumpkin. I have mine on an 18-inch design board. I'm going to sew these 2 together, these 2 together, and these 2 together. I'm going to use my 1/4 inch foot with a guide. Let's go sew our quilt. I'm going to use a gray to piece this and to do the stitch in the ditch, which we'll do together. Here's the color number. I'll be sewing this together on a Baby Lock Ballad. This is my favorite machine for doing anything that's quilted and with batting. Let me show you why. This is called a digital dual feed foot. This is better than any walking foot that I have for any of my other machines. Here's a view from the front. You see the black? It's like a little rubber conveyor belt. So that moves and it brings your fabric through along with the feed dogs. It auto adjusts to whatever height of fabric you have. You can see I've got my 1/4 inch foot with a guide. There's the guide. Here's my top 2 blocks. I want to sew that seam. I need to flip it around. You can pin, you can clip, matches up really good. I'm not worried about it. I'm going to go ahead and stitch these. This machine also has 2 foot pedals. I have the second one hooked up to raise and lower the foot. Let's go ahead and stitch the seam. Let's have a look at that. That looks fabulous. I love the way that turned out. Just like I was hoping. I don't see any of the stitch lines, any of the tack down lines on either block. Everything matches up beautifully. It goes this way. Watch when you're putting your quilt together for this moon in the middle. Face them all the same direction, or maybe you want to rotate them, personal preference. Here's the next block. I need to flip that around. Lined up against my 1/4 inch guide. That came out beautifully. I didn't lose my point. I don't see any of the stitch lines. I'm going to go ahead and continue sewing. Let's get a look at that one. Looking good. These are stitched together, these are stitched together, and these are stitched together. Now if you want, you can press these seams at this point. I'm going to go ahead and stitch those, this one, and this one, and then I'm going to take it to my ironing board, and I'm actually going to press everything open. Here it is from the back. Everything's pressed open. I did put a clapper on it. If you don't know what a clapper is, here's a clapper. You iron and then set it on top, and it helps it get extra flat. I'm going to turn everything around to the front and double check my layout. I don't want to accidentally sew a row on upside down. I've done that before. It's not the end of the world. You just have the seam rip and go back. Now when I sew these together, since my seams are pressed open, I am going to pin. I'm going to grab some pins and I'm going to pin these seams. Here's how I pin when I have something that's pressed open. I put one on each side of the seam. They do make pins that are double pronged. You could also use one of those little clips. Normally, if I'm making a regular quilt, not a quilt as you go, I'll nest my seams, press one side this way, the other side the other way, and then they fit together. But with these quilted projects like this on the embroidery machine, it's easier to press your seams open to avoid that bulk. I'm going to go ahead and pin this next one and sew this row. Let's have a look at that seam. That looks really good. Look at that. Excellent. I'm happy with that. I'm really happy with the way it's turning out with the way I trimmed it. I didn't lose a point. This seam didn't match up quite perfectly. Do you see how it's off just a little bit? I'm going to leave it. I am not going to pick that out and fuss with that. That is something that when it is on display and it's, you know, not this close, nobody's going to see it. It's going to look just fine. Let's go ahead and sew our bottom row. I'll do that off camera. I'm going to do the same procedure. Let's look at the bottom row. That came out really good. And that came out really good. So the only corner that's off is right up here. And I'm going to go press my seams open on the back. Here's the back of my completed quilt. You can see I have all my seams pressed open. We're going to move on to attaching our backing. I've got my backing fabric ready. We're on page 12 of the instructions. It says to cut your backing according to the sizing in the supply list. And then you want to turn it wrong side up. Just like that. Then we're going to center our quilt wrong sides together on top of this backing. Grab your quilt top and center that. Make sure it's nice and flat. It says to pin in place along the edges and along each seam. This is a pretty small project. Sometimes I use spray base, but I've found that it doesn't work with this kind of slick stabilizer. I'm going to go ahead and just add a pin on the seams. I don't think this is going to move very much. It's small. This is up to you. If you want to add more pins, please do. But I'm just going to pin right along the seams. I've got all my pins on. I'm going to flip this to the back. I'm checking to make sure it's laying nice and flat since I have it pinned. It looks good. We're going to go ahead and use stitch in the ditch and attach the front to the back. For stitch in the ditch, I need to get rid of the foot that has the guide on it because that guide will be in the way. I've got a regular foot. I also have a stitch in the ditch foot that has a little guide right in the middle. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. I don't feel like I need it for this project. If you've never done stitch in the ditch, what that means is you stitch right along that seam line, which is the ditch. You try to get it inside that seam line, which makes your seam that you're going to stitch disappear. I'll be honest, I never get it 100%. Usually I have some areas that are what I call ditch adjacent. Do the best you can. Nobody's going to notice. When I do stitch in the ditch, I hit my machine control, which is up here. There's a speed control so that I can't make it go too fast. And just take your time. I'm going to be careful right there because I've got a little seam from here, right where that meets, so my seam does shift just a little bit. I can bring up my needle. I can hand crank. I need to adjust just a little bit. Bring this over. Too far. Very, very, oh, goodness gracious, very minor. There we go. I'm all done. I went back and forth just a little bit here at the very end. Normally I would stitch over, but this project is a little bit different. We're going to be folding this over and using it for the binding, so I'm trying to get as close to the edge as possible. Let's get a look and see how I did for my stitch in the ditch. Here we are at the bottom. I can see a little bit of gray thread right there, the tiniest bit. This looks pretty good. I can see a little tiny bit right there. I can see a lot of tiny bit right there. Do you see that? I may actually go back and fix that because I can see it so much. Let's go the rest of the way. I've got one more spot like that. Let's have a look. Right up here, same thing. It kind of popped out. Up to you. I think I'm going to hold it up and stand back and see if I can see those two spots, and if I can, I'll fix them. I also could have used the purple thread for this. I don't have a purple that matches really well with this. That's a 50 weight, which is what I like to use when I do the stitch in the ditch because it's skinny and it disappears, but I do have a 30 weight. I'll probably use that for the binding. I went back and redid this. I picked it out and I restitched. You can see a little bit of thread, but that's much better. And then I redid the part right up here. Again, you can still see a little bit, but it's much better than it was. We just stitched this seam right here. Go ahead and stitch this seam. And then the one across here and across here. I've got all my stitch in the ditch done. There are a couple spots that I opted not to go back and fix. Right there. But if you fluff your fabric, you'll hide it. Something I found useful as I was working, especially this part, if you kind of stretch it as you're stitching in that seam, that helps hide it. The best thing would have been to have had a matching thread for this color purple, but I didn't. So I used the gray. It's fine. Most people, when they look at it, they won't see it. Let me show you the back. You can kind of see where the seams are. Just some big, long, easy seams. You can see where I fixed a couple spots. I'm back at my cutting table. I'm going to follow the instructions for using the backing as binding. I've never done that before. The first thing it tells us to do is trim each side of the backing so it's 1 1/4 inches larger than the quilt. Got a nice big ruler here. This is a Creative Grid 6.5, 12.5. It says 1 1/4 larger than the quilt. There's 1 1/8, 1 1/4. It has nice lines on this ruler, so I can check it all the way up and down, make sure we're 1 1/4. I'm going to go ahead and trim that. There's my 1 1/4. I'm going to do that on all sides of my quilt. I'm heating up my iron because we're going to be folding in the corners. While that's heating, I'm actually going to make a label. I have this really fun yardage. This came from Kath Holden's Junk Journal line. I love these little labels. I'm going to trim out a purple one. I'll use my pinking shears and trim that out. Then I use this Pentel gel roller for fabric, and I'll put my name, location, date, and the name of the project. Sometimes I put what fabric it is. This is just kind of scrap fabric. And I'll iron it on the back with the Stitch Witchery. I'll do this after we're done with the binding. Usually for a normal quilt, I'll pin it on the back, and then as I sew on the binding, it gets sewn in. But since this one, we're kind of rolling our backing, that's not going to happen. So this will be the very last thing I do. It says to fold each corner diagonally. So the fold is right at the corner of the front as shown. Remember how I trimmed mine? In their picture, they have a lot more fabric right there. Let me show you the picture. Step 44 has the pictures and the fabrics that they've been working with throughout the instructions. When they go to step 45, 46, and 47, there's different fabrics. I'm sure this is pulled from another project. I've read through these steps probably 5 times, and I do not understand this other than trim the fabric. There are directions. I'm going to have to go look for a video, and we'll see if we can figure this out, because honestly, these do not make any sense to me, so I hope I can find a video. I cannot find a video. I found a couple videos where they were working on these types of projects, and the binding was always done off camera. I did find a video where somebody did self-binding and they used something called Steam-A-Seam 2. I don't have this. I'm doing this all on my sewing machine. I'm going to try and follow the instructions. If it doesn't work, I'm going to trim it up and just do my 2.5 inch strips and do my regular traditional binding. So let's look at step 45. It says trim away part of the corner as shown. And it says with right sides together, fold the corner so the ironing line matches on both sides and pinned together. I'm guessing this is the ironing line. So that matches and then pinned together. I have to find some pins. Okay. This kind of seems needlessly complicated. I would love to know if anybody's done this before and has a good reference for this. So iron edges matched up, pinned together, and then it says fold the ironed edges back in place and sew along the ironing line. See, that's where they're losing me. I have no idea what they're talking about. I've honestly spent probably about 20 minutes trying to figure this out. Not going to do it. So I'm going to go ahead and cut my backing, cut all this extra off. I'm lucky I have extra fabric. I'm going to make myself the 2.5 inch strips that I need and do traditional binding. Let's figure out how to do that. I need to measure my top. It's 18 inches. So you know you've got 4 sides that are 18 inches. 18 times 4 is 72. And then I like to add about 10 extra inches minimum, sometimes 15. I'll go ahead and add 15 to this one because when I do the corners, I do some folding. I'll show you how I do that. That means I need 87 inches. I have a bolt, so I have 42 inches with the fabric, 2.07. So 2.5 inch strips with the fabric will work. Let me go ahead, trim this up, and cut those strips. I went into my scrap drawer. Look what I have. I have some binding from another project. Not enough to go all the way around, but I have some already made, and I have some 2.5 inch strips, so I can attach however much I need, and then you fold them in half and press it, and I'll have my binding. I've got my binding made. I'll show you how I attach binding. I can show you how I attach my label. I have a sticky note on it because I already wrote the personal information, but since I'm doing the traditional binding, I'll show you how I line this up. Here's my quilt. I like to put them in the bottom corner. So what I'll do, I cut off some of that stitch witchery. I'll put it right in the corner, like that. And then I'll go iron that down, because when I do my machine binding, it's going to get caught on 2 sides as I attach my binding, and then the rest it's going to get ironed down. If you've got overhang like that, make sure you trim it. You don't want this longer than this piece or it'll stick to your iron. You can always use a pressing cloth too to keep it from sticking to your iron. I've got that ironed on. I have my binding. I pulled this thread off my thread wall. I think this is new Bro Thread brand. I'll look it up. When I first started sewing several years ago, I bought a bunch of those boxes of thread that were inexpensive, and I still haven't gone through them all. I'm back at my machine. I have my 1/4 inch guide foot on. I have my purple thread loaded. I'll show you how I do binding. I machine bind. I don't hand bind. I don't have the patience for hand sewing, and sometimes when I do have to do some hand sewing, it doesn't come out very well. I like to start in the bottom corner. Going to line that up. This is the raw edge. Remember, you folded this in half. This is the folded edge. Put the presser foot down. And when I attach on the back, I'm using a stitch length of 2. When I go around to the front, I'll increase it to a stitch length of 3. It's prettier, it looks nicer. I'm going to go ahead and go to the corner, and I'll show you how I do my corners. I'm going to try and stop about 1/4 inch from the edge of my quilt. Had to move the tripod. So the needle's down. I went ahead and turned my quilt. I'm going to put my needle up. I'm not cutting the thread. Keep that thread attached. I'm going to fold it like this. So you've got a nice line here that matches up with your corner, a straight line here, and we're going to bring this down. This matches here. Just kind of fuss with it a little bit. This fold matches right along the top, and this matches along the side. I'm going to put this back under, and I'm going to stitch. It took me a bit of practice to do this, so if you don't get it the first time, don't get mad or anything. Just keep practicing. Let's go ahead and stitch this side, and we'll do another corner. That looks about right. Let's go ahead and turn. Close enough. I could have done one more stitch, but it'll be fine. You'll see when we bring it around to the front. So again, it's like this. Fold it up like that. So you're going diagonal to the corner. Make sure it's not like that. It's not like that. You want those edges to meet. This is straight up and down. Got your nice line right here from here to the corner of your quilt. Bring it down. Let me move my hand out of the way. So here's your line, and then I'm bringing it down straight like that. So this matches, and this is nice and straight, and this is matching across the top. Same procedure, swing it around. I keep banging my tripod here. There we go. Lift the needle, bring it forward, fold that up right to that corner, cut that line right there, hold that in place and bring it down. We're lined up here, lined up here, lined up across the top. Let's finish going all the way around and I'll show you how I join the batting at the bottom. I'm coming around to where I started. I'm going to take the end, open it up, fold it under. Just going to use my fingernails. Give it a good press, like that, to get a clean edge. I'm going to take this piece, bring it forward, and here's where I started sewing. I'm going to cut it at an angle. Let's see, that's where I started, right about there, like that. Look, I still have extra. I'm going to tuck this inside. Cutting it at an angle makes it easier to tuck in. Now make sure when you're tucking it in that your bottom doesn't accidentally slide out like that. I've done that before, and then you go to bring it around to the front and it's not attached. So make sure that that's down like that. Just kind of hold it. Get that point inside. Fold that over. I want to make sure it's nice and flat. That looks good. I'm actually going to pull this a little bit tight. That's going to keep it from getting a bump as I do the join. I'll hold that. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to hold that in place. Let's go ahead and sew all the way to where we started. I'm just going to run right over that seam line. We're all stitched down. Before I bring this around to the front, I'm going to trim some of the bulk out of the corners. I don't want to trim those threads. Those threads are holding this down, so make sure those threads are off to the side. If you do trim them off, not a big deal, just go back and sew. And I'm not going to be trimming off very much, just little tiny bits of the corner. Before I bring this to the front, I need to change the foot on my machine. That guide will get in the way when I go to sew this and attach it to the front. So I'm going to put a regular presser foot on. We're going to flip to the front, and I'm going to start in a bottom corner. Now one thing I'm going to watch for is to make sure I don't fold over too far and cover my quilting. You've got that nice line from where you just stitched it to the back. That looks really good. I'm going to try and match that up as close as possible. I am going to come right along the edge of that quilting. That is just fine. If I want, I can get really precise and try and get right on that line. That's too much stress for me. It's going to look good like that. Now, this presser foot, it kind of has a space back here. That's where my hand is. I don't like to pin things if you haven't figured that out. You could pin this or clip it or do something to hold it in place. I tend to use my fingers, and when I lower this presser foot, it's going to probably land on my finger. It's done it before. Yep, let me pull my finger out. There's a gap though behind this foot, and it kind of has the foot right there, and then there's a little space, and then the rest of the presser foot. So I just feel it touch my finger. It doesn't hurt. But try not to land on your finger. I'm going to go ahead and check where my needle is. That looks good. I want to be as close to this edge as possible. I'm going to use the little tack down stitch. That anchors it. And let's go ahead and go to the corner, and I'll show you how to get the mitered corner. Okay, I'm getting close to my corner. You have two options. I like to pull this straight down like this, so my angle is like this. And make sure you tuck in those little threads. Then I fold it up. And I get a nice mitered corner. Some people like to fold it this way, like that, but that never works for me. That's because probably because I haven't practiced that way. So I'll do it like this, fold it straight down, bring this up. Sorry, you might hear jingling. My dog is getting anxious because it's 4:30 and dog dinner is at 5 o'clock. Going to go ahead and fold that flat. Got a little bit of a bump here. Let me just straighten that out. And I'm going to hold this with my scissors. Don't run over your scissors. If you have a stiletto, now's a great time to use a stiletto. I'm going to go to the corner. There we go. I'm going to pick it up and turn it. I've got a little bump, but that'll be fine when it's done. All right, tripod adjustment there. Going to keep going to the next corner, and we'll do the next corner together. Okay, we're at our next corner. I want to tuck in those threads. Sometimes they really don't want to tuck in and they kind of get in the way. If you're curious, I learned binding from YouTube, a combination of different places that I saw, and just kind of found out what works for me. So again, bringing that down, folding this up. The corner's matching really nice. Every once in a while the corner doesn't match nice, and I just kind of have to fuss with the fabric to get it to look good. I'm going to hold it with my scissors again. I do have a stiletto. I don't know where it is though. It's not handy. Scissors will work. Okay, my needle's in the next part of the binding. I'm going to bring it around. Put the presser foot down, and I'm going to keep going to the next corner. I've got a seam right here at the very top. Remember, I'm using kind of scraps, and I just threw together my binding. If you don't like that, make sure you measure and you account for that. It doesn't bother me. Okay, we're at our next corner. Flatten, bring it up. Ah, here's a funky corner. Let's work the funky corner together. Let me get in closer. When I brought it up, it didn't match. Sorry about the jingling. My dog is literally under my feet wanting her food. We have 3 dogs. This time it works. That's what I mean by sometimes, like when you fold things, do you see that? It's not matching at all. You just need to kind of fuss with the fabric and get it to line up. So I'm going to pull it a little bit to my right, and then fold it up, and now it matches. I'm going to hold that in place, get to my corner. Okay, I'm onto this fabric strip. I'm going to turn. Let's continue down this side. Watch out for fuzzies. I just realized I forgot to adjust my stitch length to 3. It doesn't matter. The whole point of adjusting the stitch length to 3 on the front is to make it look like you did hand binding. It's not going to matter. I'm still at stitch length of 2. It's fine. Let's finish. We're at our last corner. Let's bring this down, fold it up. It's a little bulky. I could have trimmed that a little bit better, but I'm not trimming it now. I need to get done before my little dog starts chewing at my feet. I'm on to this fabric strip. Let's turn. Here's my binding join. I'm just going to be extra careful. I can feel the extra fabric in here. I'm going to take my time as I stitch over this part and make sure that I don't pull it too far and make it look weird. So just take a moment, make sure everything's lined up, hold it in place or pin or clip. I'm going to push this in just a little bit. There we go. And then make sure that that looks okay. This one's not going to be perfect. I'm kind of rushing to get done this evening. I'm trying to avoid having a bump here, but I may end up with a bump. I'm going to try and tuck this in and get it inside. Yep, there we go. Just poke it in. That way the bump will be here and will be hidden and it won't be visible along this part. I'm going to hold that down with my scissors and go slow. I'm back at the beginning. I'm going to go back a few stitches and then tack it down. We're done. Let's get a look at it. And I can tell you, I did not do the perfect job right here. Something I always mention in my videos is when you're making things, they're handmade. They're not going to be perfect. Don't strive for perfection. Strive for enjoyment, enjoying the process, and coming away with something that you really like. Let's get a good look at this. Here it is. It looks fantastic. I've got it setting on my little sewing machine cart so we can see the whole thing. Let's go in and get a good look at it. Everything looks good. One thing I am going to do, I'm going to get this under some light and I'm going to take a picture with the glow in the dark. I'll make sure to pop that up, so stay tuned. You don't want to miss that. This came out great. Despite the problems with binding, it is looking good. I hope you've enjoyed making the designs by Juju Halloween mini quilt with me. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Let me know what other projects you'd like to see in the comments below. I would also love to know if you know how to do that binding. If you've got a video resource, please link it in the comments below. Then I can watch it and other people can watch it. My traditional binding came out just fine. Let me show you the label. See how it got caught in the binding? Here and here. So my label is done. And my Halloween quilt is ready to go on display. As promised, here is a picture of it with the glow in the dark. Oh my gosh, isn't that just absolutely the neatest thing? I'm so excited. I'm so happy I have that thread and I found a great project for it. Thank you so much for joining me. Please feel free to leave any feedback in the comments below. I'll be bringing more fun Designs by Juju projects. Again, if you've got a request, leave it in the comments below for me. See you next time.